all so much for coming out on such a sunny, great afternoon. My name's Anna Palmer. I'm CEO and one of the founders of Punchbowl News. We are thrilled that all of you are joining us in person and for those that are joining us virtually for this important conversation as part of Punchbowl News' Cocktails and Conversations. Tonight's conversation is going to be about broadening food access. We're going to start with a conversation with Representative Jim McGovern, the Democrat from Massachusetts and chair of the House Rules Committee. Afterward, we're going to have a fireside chat where I'm going to be joined on stage with Elizabeth Jarvis-Sheen, Vice President of Communications and Policy at DoorDash, and Carrie Calvert, Vice President of Agriculture and Nutrition Government Relations at Feeding America, where we're going to discuss how local delivery and other innovative practices are helping broadening food access, particularly coming out of the pandemic. And of course, I want to just remind everyone, the bar is going to open, the food will come back after the conversation, so hopefully you'll stick around and we can socialize for a bit and get to know each other better. If you want to share about this conversation on social media, we are at Punchbowl News on all social media platforms. And with that, I'd like to invite Mr. McGovern to the stage. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Right here. Did the bar close?
They did. Now we got to.
I'm better if you drink. Yeah. All right.
All right. We are going to talk about broadening food access, but before we do, we always center these conversations in a bit of the news of the day. And there is no shortage of that in Washington this week. I want to start, number one, gun control legislation. The House moved forward with multiple pieces of legislation, including raising the age limit for buying semi-automatic rifles from 18 to 21, raising the, however, these bills have no chance of overcoming, being passed into law in the Senate. Can you talk about what you think needs to be in a final Senate bill in order to feel like some real progress is made?
Well, I just think we need to get something done. I mean, we're living at a time where we have a dictatorship of the minority in the Senate where, measures like the ones you just mentioned that have overwhelming support, 80% of the American people favor raising the age that you can buy an AR-15 to 21, or even stuff that we've passed before, universal background checks, overwhelmingly popular in this country, and yet we run into a buzzsaw in the Senate called the filibuster, where they basically they use it so that we can't even debate these issues. So I don't know what can be passed in the Senate. I'm hoping that these bipartisan negotiations will produce something. But after what we've been through in the last couple of weeks, if nothing gets done, we all should be ashamed. Our members of the Senate and members of the House ought to understand that protecting our kids is more important than protecting a PAC check from the gun lobby.
All right. I want to talk about another important issue that is happening and shifting gears here pretty quickly because we want to get to the main stage conversation. But I do want to ask about January 6th. The committee hearings are scheduled to start in just a few hours. There's been a lot of talk about new information coming to light. What should we be looking for? The
truth. I mean, I was I think probably the last person off the House floor on January 6th. I took over from Speaker Pelosi when she was whisked away by security. I came face to face with this mob of neo-Nazis and white supremacists. I mean, I looked into their eyes. If you asked me to tell you what evil looks like, it was looking into the eyes of those trying to smash the window in the Speaker's lobby to get at us. But the American people deserve the truth, and they deserve to know the extent to which the President of the United States was involved in all of this. And I think what we're going to find out tonight and in the hearings that will follow is that much of what happened on January 6th was the masterminds of what happened on January 6th were in the West Wing, including the President of the United States. And so I want to make sure that, when all is said and done, nobody can say they didn't know what really happened. We will know what really happened. And I think what happened was shocking. And I think if those who tune in will feel that way, and then we'll see where that goes.
Do you think it's going to change anybody's minds? It seems like most people believe what they believe happened on January 6th.
Yeah, you're going to see videotape. It's not take the word of Benny Thompson or Liz Cheney. You're going to see new videotape. You're going to see new transcripts of texts going back and forth to keep people in the White House. Look, the truth ought to matter. And if it doesn't, we're in trouble. January 6th really was an attack on our democracy. And I'm really worried about our democracy, whether it survives. There's nothing that says it is sacrosanct, that it can't be obliterated. And I'm worried that that's the direction we're going in if we're not going to believe in facts, if we're not going to believe in truth. And I get it, if you were a supporter of Donald Trump, you don't want to believe that. But you know what? Sometimes people do things that are disappointing even to their supporters. And whether you're on the left or the right or anywhere in between, you ought to be horrified by what happened on that day. People died. 140 Capitol Police officers were injured. I mean, staff, some who are here today, were traumatized by what went on that day. I'll never forget what happened that day. And it was an attack on our democracy. It was an attempted coup. And here's the scary thing. The coup is ongoing. And if we don't recognize the truth, acknowledge the truth, and then take appropriate steps to protect our democracy, we will lose this democracy.
I want to ask you one last question, then we're going to get to broadening food access, which is reconciliation. There's been a lot of talk about renewed efforts between Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Joe Manchin to come to some sort of agreement, albeit a much smaller package than maybe what was originally under consideration. How important do you think it is for Democrats that you pass something before the midterms, even if it's modest?
Well, I think we have to pass something. Look, I wanted to pass something months ago, but I think we ought to have some urgency to it. And it won't be as big as I wanted it to be, but I hope it includes things like the child tax credit, which, by the way, helped alleviate childhood hunger, right? I hope it includes a generous investment in combating climate change and in child care, among other things. Again, we won't get everything we want, but if we can get some of those key things, that'll be a big deal. And look, the American people want us to do something, to deliver. And they don't want us just to fight with one another. They want us to get things done. And so my hope is that these negotiations will come to a close soon and that we move something forward. And I'm confident that we will.
All right. Well, time will tell on that. I want to talk about the child tax credit, childhood hunger, the White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health. This is the second ever that this is going to happen, decades later. You helped shepherd Congress passing a bill to fund this and make it happen. Can you talk about what your hopes are for this event in September, and why is it so important?
I want to end hunger. That's the whole point of it. We live in a country, the richest country in the history of the world, and we've got 40 million Americans who don't know where their next meal is going to come from. As a congressman, just as a citizen, I'm ashamed. We have money for nuclear weapons and sending arms overseas and corporate tax cuts, but yet we seem to come up short when it comes to alleviating hunger. I'm somebody who believes that food ought to be a fundamental human right for every single person in this country and every single person on this planet. And there is no reason at all why we can't end hunger in this country. Hunger is a political condition. And by that I mean we have the food, we have the money, we have the infrastructure, we have everything, but we don't have the political will. And the reason why this White House conference is important is because there is no one person in government whose job it is to end hunger. There is no one agency, there is no one congressional committee. If you want to talk about SNAP, you go to the Agriculture Committee or USDA. If you want to talk about school feeding, you go to the Education and Labor Committee. If you want to talk about food as medicine, you go to the Energy and Commerce Committee, or maybe Ways and Means. But nothing is connected. We need an all-of-government approach. We need to work with the private sector and the nonprofit sector, and we need to have a plan. Hillary Clinton says it takes a village. I say you do need a village, but you need a plan. We don't have a plan. We haven't had a plan. And as you point out, the last conference we did on this topic was in 1969, over 50 years ago. And that conference produced WIC, the Women's, Infants, and Children's Program, as well as the modern-day SNAP program. Good things came out of it. We can do better. And I have high expectations for this. The White House is actually taking it seriously and doing a good job initially, listening sessions all around the country that are oversubscribed. They're soliciting good ideas from all sectors, local government, nonprofits, the business community, trying to piece together a holistic plan that with benchmarks so we can end hunger in this country by 2030.
What role do you want to play as part of that?
Well, first of all, it took a hell of a long time to get here. I mean, I've been pushing this since President Obama first became president. And, you know, I tried very hard during the Obama administration to get this up and running. It didn't happen. Then 4 years of Trump, I said, forget about it, right? But we pushed very hard with President Biden, and to his credit, he said yes. And he is involving every agency and every department in government. I mean, the role I want to play is to make sure that it happens and it produces results. I'm not interested in doing a conference to check the box. We could do a press conference for that. I want this to be transformational. I want us to be on a road to end hunger in this country. I want us to be a model for the rest of the world. Look, there are some problems that I can't tell you how to solve, and that maybe can't be solved in my lifetime. This is not one of them. And by the way, we're doing this in a bipartisan way. Congresswoman Jackie Walorski has been a partner in all of this. Speaker Pelosi has been magnificent, because when she calls the White House to say, did you respond to McGovern yet, it has a little bit,
a little more juice.
And so, you know, so this is something that I would like to think could bring everybody together, left, right, everybody in between. I'd like to think there's nobody who serves on Capitol Hill who's pro-hunger. There may be a couple, but I think the overwhelming majority of people, I think, understand the need to solve this. And by the way, it's not just a moral issue. If you don't care about the morality of people going of ending hunger in this country, and all you care about is the bottom line, it is expensive to allow hunger to continue. Kids who don't learn in school, lost productivity in the workplace, avoidable medical costs, all that stuff we are paying for now, we can get those savings and put into something else.
I want to ask you, usually it's my job to write the headlines, but you talked about WIC, you talk about SNAP from the last one of these. What is your best headline coming out of this conference?
We're on a pathway to end hunger. I mean, I want us. I mean, that's the headline, and there's a lot of things we need to do. I mean, there's an intersectionality here with a lot of other different issues that we need to address. It's not just SNAP, although that's important. I mean, it's housing. It's jobs that pay a livable wage so people can actually afford to put food on the table. It's about access to decent nutrition. We have people who live in food apartheids. I don't say deserts because those are natural. We purposely create these food apartheids where there's no supermarkets, where people don't have access to good food. You know, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, immediately, you know, the immediate headline is there are some waivers that have been put into place during the pandemic that need to be extended. They expire in June. And we need to extend the waiver on making sure that there are free, universal free school meals for every child in this country.
So I'm going to ask you about the waivers and the Farm Bill and what the mechanism is in a little bit. But I do want to talk. I mean, we are here, and I think the pandemic in particular put into focus for a lot of people that maybe their everyday isn't about this mission of ending hunger, that you really saw it. You saw the lines at food banks. You saw the people that were struggling out of COVID. Talk about some of the innovation that happened, because there was some effort around kind of interesting partnerships, private and public. What did you see that worked?
Well, I mean, the work in the school, the stuff we did in schools worked. I mean, the universal meals, the free meals, being able to hand out meals from the schools for people who are in need, providing more flexibility in how those meals were able to be delivered worked. There were partnerships in my city of Worcester in terms of working with local restaurants and working with local farms to be able to keep those restaurants in business and using them as the place to prepare food and then get it out to the community. I mean, we ought to keep that in place. You know, some of what we do in this country when it comes to, you know, dealing with the issue of food insecurity, and especially in schools and in hospitals, is we kind of contract out with agencies and groups that get the food from halfway across the country or halfway out across the world. We ought to be thinking more locally, build in flexibility in these programs so we can boost up our local restaurants, our local farms, and so the entire community benefits. And that's a way to alleviate food insecurity in the community.
I want to ask about, obviously the pandemic put this into focus, but now we're facing inflation, right? There are a lot of other pressures that families are facing right now. What role does Congress have in terms of extending maybe some of these waivers? Is it through the Farm Bill? Is it through other legislation, that can kind of help with this relief?
Well, again, some of these waivers are expiring at the end of June, so we're going to have to come up with legislation either on its own or attach it to something to get this thing done. I mean, the challenge is we don't quite have the Congress that, I'm talking about the House and the Senate that I would envision in my perfect world, right? That would agree with me on everything. So
that might be an understatement.
Right. So we have to deal with the reality in which we're living. And when it comes to school meals, for example, we have Republicans who are saying we need offsets. We don't need offsets for corporate tax cuts, but we need offsets to make sure kids have food. But whatever, I don't want to go there. But anyway, but the fact of the matter is, okay, then we need to figure out, how big of a package we can move, where we find those offsets. Speaker Pelosi, Rosa DeLauro, Bobby Scott, and I have been meeting. I know Abigail Spanberger and Ellen Omar, others who have been champions on this issue. We're going to work with them. Debbie Stabenow in the Senate, working with Senator Bozeman. So we're going to try to figure out what is the most we can do, at least in the short term, to extend these waivers, because we're going to have to pay for them.
Right. Last question. You have a captive audience here who clearly cares about this issue and is focused on it from an innovative perspective, from a food access perspective, from the nonprofit sector. What's your message to them? What should they be doing?
This ought to be a priority, and because it touches almost every other issue. I mean, even in the healthcare arena, we've been doing hearings in the Rules Committee on this topic, and I'm just amazed at the disconnect between food, nutrition, and healthcare, and food, nutrition, education. Our schools ought to teach nutrition. They ought to teach people about agriculture, even how to prepare food. I think is an important skill. Our hospitals and our medical profession ought to understand the value of nutrition and good food to health and well-being, and yet there's this disconnect. My grandmother used to tell me all the time that food is medicine. It used to annoy me, right? I'm sorry, she used to say an apple a day keeps the doctor away. That would annoy me. I wish she was still alive so I could say, you're right? It's true. And yet you can get an expensive prescription from a doctor. Well, why can't you get a prescription for fresh produce? Well, and why don't we insist that medical students actually have to take courses in nutrition so they actually get prepared to deal with the challenges that people are facing? Again, you name the disease, it gets tied back to food. And so, if we want to do a better job of preventative care, if we want to control healthcare costs, everybody ought to be involved in this. And the final thing I'm going to say is there was a time in this country where we thought big. We saw big problems. And then we get to the point where we started thinking, we could only think small. This is a big problem. 40 million Americans don't know where their next meal is going to come from. I want us to think big again. And yeah, I'm a liberal, but this is not just a liberal issue. It's a conservative issue. It's a moderate issue. We should all be together on this. Let us solve hunger in America. And if we do that, we will have not only, I think, solved this great moral crisis, but we will be a healthier country, and we will be a more productive country. And it will be something that we can all join together and celebrate that we did something big. And so let's think big, and we can do this. And get involved in this White House conference.
All right. With that, thank you so much,
Thank
Mr.
you.
McGovern. I really appreciate it. All right, take care.
Thank you.
All right. I'd like to welcome Carrie Calvert, VP of Agriculture, Nutrition, Government Relations at Feeding America, as well as Elizabeth Jarvis-Sheen, Vice President of Communications and Policy at DoorDash, to the stage. Hi. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Mr. McGovern gave us no shortage of things to follow up on. I want to start here, which is, let's just lay out, we talked a little bit with him about the pandemic, but from both of your perspectives, from the food bank perspective, from the private sector perspective, I'm going to start with you, Carrie, but talk about the pandemic and how it put hunger into focus.
Yeah, happy to.
we saw this back during the Great Recession, right? Whenever there's like a big national event or emergency, it really does unite people and brings things like this to the forefront of the community's attention. And people are really generous. We've seen that giving goes up, donations go up, and it's really heartening to see that response. So certainly during the pandemic, particularly in 2020, we really saw that. We saw galvanizing bipartisan attention from Congress to expand access to federal nutrition programs, to other COVID recovery funds, a lot of them really innovative. I mean, pandemic EBT was not a thing that was talked about very often prior to 2020, right? Mm-hmm. So in a way, it brought out the best aspects and intents of so many organizations, whether they were businesses, private sector, governments at the local and federal level, and nonprofits. Mm-hmm. And it's also, I know we'll get to like the innovative parts. It's hard to not jump there at first, but I think it also jump-started a lot of the discussions we were having about how do you serve people? What's the right role of these broad federal nutrition programs, which really are the underpinning of how we reduce food insecurity? And then what's the role of food banks and other charitable food assistance to augment those larger national programs? And how do you reach people? Mm-hmm. How do you reach people in a medical emergency? Mm-hmm. How do you reach people that have limited food access or transportation challenges? And I think there's a lot of learnings from that we can carry forward, whether it's through legislation or work at the federal level or the White House conference the Congressman mentioned.
Absolutely. Liz?
Well, yeah, I think exactly as Carrie said, and what we saw at DoorDash, where we could play a role, in particular during the pandemic. This is, unfortunately right now, food insecurity has been an evergreen problem, but it became more acute during the pandemic, and the nature of access to food for those who are facing hunger became more challenging in certain ways. And so how could we really step in and accelerate our efforts that had been nascent in some ways up to that point, and really go big there and find partners like Feeding America, local food banks all around the country, and take the technology and the logistics network that, for many of you, if you open your phones, maybe brings you, tacos or burgers or, something from the grocery store or convenience store, diapers for the kids. How can we leverage that same technology, make it available to those who are in the community, trying to reach people who need food, who, I think probably you all found that even more of those folks had trouble getting that access, right? In the same way that all of us moved in some ways to, contactless delivery and had to stay home and be mindful of masking or all those kinds of things, that also impacts those who are food insecure and perhaps even more acutely. Right. And so it put into really stark relief the opportunity, but also the responsibility we had to bring to bear our resources and connect with these kinds of partners to how do you get that last mile for folks who couldn't go wait online in food banks, as you talked about. We all saw those photos and the videos of folks who were waiting online at food banks. There were a lot of folks who couldn't go do that physically. How do you reach them? How do you reach those kids who are not going to school every day and getting hot lunch? And that was really an opportunity that we were excited about.
Talk about, because you've been very active in this space through the pandemic and kind of this post period that we're in right now, hopefully post. But talk about the role DoorDash is playing when it comes to food access, and in particular Project Dash, because I think that's kind of the next phase of a lot of this. Right.
So Project Dash actually started. It was an employee-driven idea back in 2017, and in some ways it was actually started with a lot of what Congressman McGovern talked about, which is restaurants and other partners who have food at the end of the day, so restaurants, grocery stores, and others. How could we help transport that to the food banks? And that was where sort of Project Dash started. How could we then bring to bear our relationships with those partners, the logistics network that exists, and make that connection? In particular, during the pandemic, I think that has really transformed because the needs have been so acute within the communities. I mean, 1 in 5 Americans, 1 in 5 Americans experienced food insecurity during the pandemic. 12 million kids. That became the priority. And so we have built amazing relationships. I mean, I think 2/3 of the food banks in your all's network, we are partnering with on the ground. We work with United Way, others. Anyone who needed to reach people, we were there, wanted to step that up. And so what it's really about is the same technology, the same logistics network, the same platform that we build, again, to bring folks that which they need, whether it's through our app or other things like that. Like, we wanted to make that available to partners, and so connecting through that, we have now passed 2 million deliveries done, which is 30 million meals delivered around the country, and we are excited to do more. But that's really, it's about the convenience that a lot of us get to experience that was really needed during the pandemic. Also with an element of dignity that can be a little bit different, that I think maybe you can talk about. But those deliveries come to you the same as any DoorDash grocery delivery. And for folks who were both experiencing sort of that upheaval of the pandemic, along with perhaps food insecurity for the first time, there was an element of this is just like getting my groceries delivered.
I want to talk about kind of what you're doing next in this pilot program.
Yeah.
But before that, I do think it's a good point, Liz, in terms of just, how has this changed? I mean, the ability to, if either you physically can't go or maybe you had a hard time getting there for a lot of different reasons. How has this technology kind of helped you all in terms of just this mission of making sure that people aren't hungry?
Yeah, it was interesting. It really sort of intersected with some of the innovations that we were pursuing to have a more neighbor-centered approach, right? How can we put the needs of the people we're serving at the center of it? So similar to My Pantry Express, which one of their partners, the Food Bank of Delaware, highlighted yesterday on a briefing. We've got Order Ahead, which is really like an online platform so the people we serve can geolocate the pantry near them, understand are they eligible, what resources are they eligible for, and select the food that's appropriate for their family's dietary needs, right? So, distributing things in highly efficient boxes of mass distributions worked when we were facing, skyrocketing demand in the middle of a health emergency. But we really want to put the people we're serving at the center of it, and technology like this is enabling us to do so because we're able to realize who's homebound or what areas are we serving where there's less food access or we have less agency partners, and we need to employ innovations like direct delivery or mobile pantry or both, most likely, to try to reach people.
Yeah, Liz, why don't you build off of that? Because I know you guys are doing some exciting things.
Exactly.
In this area.
So, the Food Bank of Delaware was mentioned, so we've been partnering with them. Again, the idea here is to bring all the technology, all the logistics network to bear in the same way that we do for consumers every day, bring it to bear to help fight food insecurity in these local communities. And so we have been piloting something called Storefront with the Food Bank of Delaware. So it's Storefront for food banks, and it literally is, as Carrie was talking about. So you go to, I think it's fdb.org, Food Bank of Delaware, and you select one of the 3 locations that we partner with right now, whichever one is sort of closest to you. And from there, it'll take you to a menu, and you can choose the box that's best for your family. So if you are a vegetarian, there's a vegetarian option. There's a protein option, meat protein option. If that's better for you, you can, I think, adjust a little bit by virtue of the size of your family. That's why we've done about 3,000 deliveries. And again, it's about meeting people where they are. And the idea then is to expand exactly as Carrie's talking about. So come holiday season, it is, tailored to that which your family needs for your particular, whether it's religious affiliation or cultural or dietary needs. The idea is to meet people where they are and to give them that same kind of choice and identify what is best for them to help their families be, as Congressman McGovern talks about, not just fed, but healthy and thriving.
I want to ask 2 last questions. One, we talked a lot with the congressman about his hopes for this White House conference. Obviously, something he's been focused on for a very long time just to get it off the ground. From both of your perspectives, I'd be interested to know, I asked him the question, what's his headline, right, that comes out of it? But from your vantage point, what are you most optimistic about, or what are you hoping that can come out of it?
Well, first, just a huge thanks to the congressman for his long-time advocacy on the issue of hunger and for his vision in pushing for this. It is not the... I think we all want to show up really well for it, and we want to engage the people we serve, our food bank network, and broader allies and partners in this work, which is why it's so great to have, partners like DoorDash and others that want to work on, public-private solutions. I think there are a couple words that have come up here, like dignity, equity, choice. Like, I think those are great themes and really they can carry over into both charitable food distribution and federal nutrition programs. We want equitable access, right? We want to make sure that people in need are able to access the programs in an easy, dignified way. And we want to make sure that everyone has, the option to choose the food that's right for their family. People facing hunger need more choices, not less. So we're really hoping the conference brings more ideas to the table, whether it's, looking at, let's say, rural development grants and the fact that a lot of the very small rural communities they're meant to serve don't have a nonprofit that can handle the grant application process in there. There's a need for partnership and technical assistance. So, what can a combined whole of government approach do to identify all of these little areas? On food delivery, there's a program for low-income seniors, and there's cheese that comes with that box. You're well aware of that, right? So, what's the administrative process to, look at the good of the whole, so to speak, and, okay, well, seniors in this really rural community aren't able to access this program. What are our options for getting food to them? Yeah. I would rather they get most of the product versus none of it if it's, there's a cheese delivery issue,
if there's no government cheese.
Yeah.
There we go.
It all comes back to the government cheese.
I think I love the idea of both more ideas, but I think also just more attention and more folks really locking arms and moving forward to make progress on the issues the Congressman talked about, right? It's not just a bypass, this is a nonpartisan issue. This is something that everyone, public sector, private sector, nonprofit, no kid should be hungry. People should not go hungry in this country. And the attention and the resources that hopefully can be brought to bear with the ideas and the plan, putting a framework around it and really pulling as many people as possible together, highlighting what an important issue this is, and getting those commitments from across the country and across stakeholder sets to actually make progress so that, and I think I'm hoping I'm not getting ahead of your next question, but again, if 1 in 5 Americans were food insecure during the pandemic, how do we get that number down? How do you get it to 1 to 6, 1 to 7? How do you make progress on that? That should be the goal, a huge goal as part of that conference.
Yeah, you preempted the last question. I don't even need to ask you, which was, what's the future?
Yeah.
I want to say I think one of the things that's going to be very interesting for all of us is to keep this conversation going, right? The conference is in September. What actually comes out of it?
Exactly.
This is not going to be something that's going to be solved in today's conversation and some of these really prevalent problems that are systemic in our society, but are certainly, I'm really glad that we were able to have this conversation and surface where there's some opportunities and kind of end on an optimistic note, for sure. Carrie, Elizabeth, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us in person, on stage, as well as virtually. And, of course, to Mr. McGovern for joining us on a busy week, and to DoorDash for helping make this conversation possible. I hope everyone sticks around. There's drinks, there's light bites. We can mingle and hopefully hear more about what people are working on in this area. So thank you so much. Have a great day and stay safe.
Thank you, everybody.